Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting of the Board of Supervisors back to order. It's just 1:30 p.m. We're in the Sierra Room at Carson at the Community Center. I'd like to have the board's and the public's indulgence to take item 27 Charlie out of order because it's a small matter. It won't take but a few minutes here. It's a clear and title matter, so unless there's an objection, we'll take that one out of order, then we can devote time to the BLM issues. So let's take up item 27 Charlie. This is a discussion and possible action regarding a request to terminate a lease created September 1st, 1974. That was before I was born. You can laugh.
Nice try.
Nice try.
He was checking to see if anybody's.
Yeah, see it if you're listening. All right. I don't know who, Stephanie, you're doing this one. This is clear and title. Oh, we got it. Wait. We got two disclosures. Go ahead. Supervisor Abel, then Supervisor Bunkowski, excuse me.
NRS 2818.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. In my private capacity, I am an interior designer, and currently I have a contract with Bruce Robertson for design work. Bruce Robertson represents the parties on the matter before me regarding the termination of lease. A reasonable person in my position would be materially affected by this relationship, and therefore I will abstain from participating on this matter.
I also have a disclosure. NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from participating when I have a disqualifying conflict. In my private capacity, I am a partner in the real estate brokerage firm NAI Alliance, Carson City. The Crex, who are the lessee on this item, are clients of NAI Alliance. Because of NAI's relationship with the Crex, is a substantial and continuing business relationship. A reasonable person in my position would be materially affected by this relationship. Therefore, I have a disqualifying conflict, and I will not participate on this matter.
Okay. Any other disclosures? All right. You two are out. Okay. All right. Ms. Hicks, this is a lease that was created September, 1974, and it appears of record. And they're requesting it be removed from the record because it hasn't been in effect for a long time, right?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. Stephanie Hicks, real property manager for the record. I was contacted by Mr. Robertson to research the leasehold that showed up on the title report. The property is currently in escrow and it's to close the end of the month. And it was a little challenging to find some information as far as how far back is it dated. The parcel was originally created in the 60s. The lease occurred in 74. But there was some information that we were able to find that talked about where these parcels went from just being leased by the city to the desire for the city to sell them, and that occurred in the 80s, and those records are included in the staff report. I did follow up. Mr. Robinson provided me contact information for former city manager Don Hadaway, and he is involved in those conversations in the 80s about these parcels, and he indicated, quite frankly, he was surprised that a leasehold would have shown up on the title. His recollection was the entire intent of moving forward and putting those parcels up for sale was for the city to get out of the lease business altogether. And so we are providing that information to the board to determine whether they agree to terminate the lease on this parcel.
Okay. Board, I don't know that we need public testimony. This is a kind of an administrative matter, so unless the board or the public wants to hear additional comments, I understand what happened in the 80s. I kind of represented some people out there way back then. I know that the city was selling, terminating the leases and selling the property. So this is clear and title. Everybody okay? Look this way. We okay with doing this?
I just want to sit down with you later and find out what happened in the 80s.
Actually, you know what? I've got a heck of a story for you. Later. I've got a heck of a story for you. It's a fascinating one. All right. Public want to weigh in? Anybody in the public want to weigh in on this issue? If not, let's take a motion and we can help this move along.
Okay.
Who wants to do it?
I'll do it.
Supervisor Bagwell, go.
I move to approve a notice of termination of lease created September 1, 1974 between Carson City, Nevada as the lessor and Douglas Scott Kreck, deceased, and Stephen Christopher Kreck and Jeffrey Weston Kreck, lessee for Lot 59 of the Carson City Industrial Air Park.
Second. There's a motion, a second on the motion. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain, 2. So let the record reflect that the vote is 3-2. Supervisors Bunkowski and Aboud abstaining. Okay. Is that all right with everybody? Okay. All right. Let's take up the BLM issues. Let me suggest we're going to do 27 Alpha first. But on all these BLM issues, let me just say a couple words. I know we got a lot of people who are interested in this. Let me just say, kind of to set the table, you can rest assured that the board members have read all the comments that have been submitted. And we've also been briefed on what happened at the open houses, and some were there. We don't use a 3-minute rule here, and we don't because on the assumption that people will be concise as they can in their comments. So try to be concise. Try not to be repetitive of other people. If somebody said the same thing you did, feel free to come up and say, I agree with that person. If there's a representative of a group, let the representative speak. And if you feel that the representative hasn't done a good enough job, come on up and say that as well. But we're here to listen, and that's why we don't use the 3-minute rule. Try to be respectful of other speakers. You don't have to be respectful of us up here, but other speakers, it's a good idea to be respectful for. It's the right thing to do, too. All right, so let's take up 27 Alpha.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stephanie Hicks, Real Property Manager. The first of 2 items before you this afternoon is to provide recommendation to the Bureau of Land Management regarding the sale of 4 parcels. One of those parcels is located on South Edmonds Drive, and the other 3 are off of Flint Drive. We do have Ann Bollinger here as our Open Space Administrator. She's here. She's going to assist me in this presentation, as well as Victoria Wilkins from BLM. We also have our City Engineer Dan Stuckey and our Development Engineer Stephen Pote here to answer any questions as we work through this particular presentation.
For the record, Ann Bollinger, Open Space Administrator. Good afternoon. Some parts of this presentation and the next are very similar. So in this first one, I'll be more thorough on the background, and then the next presentation just add some of the elements that are different. So first of all, I'd like to inform the board as well as members of the public on the background of what brought us to where we are today. So back in 2006, the city began a very public and transparent process to look at all the lands around Carson City, and we looked at them in the sense of consolidated land ownerships instead of checkerboard patterns of city land in the Forest Service or BLM. And we also looked at what are some of the best land uses for some of these properties. And so we started that process in 2006. You can see during that time there were 13 meetings. Those meetings were held both in public forums at the advisory committees and also at open houses at the BLM. So there was quite a bit of opportunity for input, and then even with the Board of Supervisors. During that process, when we were identifying these lands and best land uses, the BLM came to Carson City with a couple of parcels that they had around town. And that because they were in an urban interface environment, they did not have a desire to keep them, so they did offer them to the city first. We went through the process to see, did we want those properties, in this case Flint Drive, and the next case off Pinion Hills. Does the city have any particular interest for open space, parks, commercial development, and such? So we went through that process, and in this case, for Flint Drive, those properties were identified for commercial, possible residential uses, and then on Edmonds, residential, because that's the surrounding land ownership. In January 2007, at that Board of Supervisors meeting, that was, and I realize none of you were at that meeting, it was a completely different board, but that was the board meeting in which that final map was recommended to our congressional delegation. And then later on, not on our timeline for the city, but in 2008, July 2008 is when they introduced our bill in the U.S. Senate. And at that time, it was called the Carson City Vital Community Act of 2008. Then in August, after it was introduced in the Senate, it did come back to the Board of Supervisors with those changes from when the board provided your first recommendations, and then it came back. So again, it was a very transparent process. Some of the items that came out of the Congress was, for example, in the area of Deer Run Road, the Ambrose Carson River Natural Area, Silver Saddle Ranch, and Ambrose, there was a significant public concern of what was the city going to do with these lands when we acquired them. So there was a great concern that we would develop, and one of the results of the legislation is that there would be a conservation easement placed on these lands and protect them as an open space in perpetuity. And then in 2009, the act was passed. Some of the language in that act, it said within 1 year of enactment, the city shall provide direction to the federal agencies, the Forest Service and BLM, on what our intentions were for disposal of these lands. And so that's why then in December 2009, staff came back to the Board of Supervisors with the direction at that time that on certain parcels to wait for disposal until market conditions were better. And the board approved that action. And so with the exception of some lands that were disposed of, particularly over in the Costco area, so there were some disposal properties that are completed. Some of these remainder lands, and this isn't all, we still just have a few more pieces that are hanging out there. The board decided to postpone. And then last year, in 2006, staff did come to the board to ask for disposal of one parcel, again in the Pinion Hills neighborhood, because there was an interest in acquisition for residential development. I think at the time it was just tabled because there were too many questions that we needed to look at. Also, in conversations with the BLM afterwards, it was decided that when this comes forward, they would prefer a whole package. To come to the Board of Supervisors, because when they look at disposal properties, and Victoria will talk about this later, about the entire process that they have to go through for disposal.
So we did also provide to you up on this slide the map that was actually prepared at the request of Senator Harry Reid back in 2008, and we expanded and highlighted out for you. That red square is the Edmonds parcel that we're discussing with this item. And on this next exhibit, up there in the top right-hand corner, those are the properties for Flint. So those were identified on the map in 2008. We did want to also provide just a vicinity, a little bit of a blow-up of those areas and the zoning. So as Ann indicated, the Edmonds Drive parcel is zoned single-family, 1 acre in size, and the Flint Drive parcels are zoned general commercial. What that will mean in regards to potential future development is that for the South Edmonds Drive, we'd be looking at something residential in nature. It would require a formal drainage and access easement. There are some existing drainage facilities that are on the site, and we also have a sewer main that runs through that parcel east to west. The parcel itself is 2 acres in size, but because of that drainage and also the sewer main, there may be some limitations on whether that parcel could be divided in the future. However, both city sewer and water are available to the site, and there are no mapped flood hazards for that particular parcel. Looking at the Flint Drive parcels, the zoning is general commercial. They would also be required to accept drainage from uphill or upstream of the parcels, and paved access must be provided. A water main would need to be extended for the service there, and there are also no mapped flood hazards on these parcels. So should this go forward for sale and someone be interested in developing, they would have to come through the city processes, and these items would be reviewed for those developments. And we'll let Victoria walk you through the BLM process should the recommendation go forward.
Hi, for the record, my name is Victoria Wilkins, and I'm an assistant field manager with the BLM for the Sierra Front Field Office. And I'm here to help explain what our process would be and answer any questions on our process. So although this disposal was included in the legislation didn't exempt the project from environmental and cultural resource evaluation through NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NHPA, which is the National Historic Preservation Act. So we still have to go through and follow those processes. As part of the NEPA process for a disposal, we would be completing an environmental assessment, most likely. There would be an opportunity as part of the NEPA process for public input through a public scoping period, and then also public comment on the environmental assessment documents. In this case, though, because this is a legislated action, the scope of our analysis would be narrower than for a typical project because our decision space is very limited. Our decision space is limited to either complying with the law or not complying with the law, which isn't an option. And so really the purpose of the NEPA document would be analysis and disclosure to the public of what the potential effects would be, as well as identifying, in particular in the case of the cultural resources, if there was any mitigation necessary in order to move forward. So once we go through the NEPA and the Section 106 consultation processes, then we would be able to move forward with putting up the parcels for sale. So we would have to go through all of that prior to even putting them up for sale. Part of the sale process is appraisals through the Office Evaluation Services. The Office Evaluation Services is a separate agency within the Department of Interior, and our policy requires all interior agencies to go through them for appraisal services. They have a very set standards by which they appraise properties and appraise value. They would use the fair market value, and it's determined by highest and best use. And they would utilize what we call the Yellow Book, which is the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, which is a nice thick book that lays out all of their requirements that they have to meet through the appraisal process. So BLM actually really has no direct involvement with or control over the appraisal process. That all goes through Office Evaluation Services. So the legislation directs and our policy directs that the parcels can't be sold for less than fair market value. So that OBS appraisal is what's going to be utilized to determine what the fair market value is. As part of the process, after we've completed NEPA, gotten those appraisals, we would be putting in a notice of realty action in the Federal Register, and that's an official notice that would allow people, that would basically announce that these parcels were being considered to go up for sale. There is actually also a comment period on that Federal Register notice. And then the sale of the parcels themselves would be through an open competitive bidding process, which is what was specified in the legislation.
Before we conclude our presentation, just a few things that I would like to add to the discussion is, we have received a lot of feedback in regards to the disposal of BLM properties overall. We did explore whether or not there could be a first right of refusal to adjacent property owners, and it was determined that the legislation would not allow for that. And in regards to any surveying needs or if there are needs for right-of-way out there, or right-of-way that exists on any of these parcels, that would all be dealt with before they could go up for sale. And so that does conclude our formal presentation, but we are available for questions.
Does open competitive bidding process include a public auction?
Yes, it does. What we would be able to do is we would do a sealed bid auction, but then it would go up for a competitive auction. So they would start the auction by opening those sealed bids, and the highest bid is what would start the bidding process. But it would allow the opportunity for people who were interested to see what that highest bid was, and then beat that through the actual auction process.
What happens if you don't get a bid that meets, is the fair market value a minimum bid?
Yes.
So you have to, minimum bid is fair market value.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, questions?
My question relates probably more to the next item, but still, in your NEPA process, since you have to be compliant, does that environmental assessment include assessing water quality? So in other words, if you have more wells tapping into an already not so great water supply, then does that increase concentrations? Do you test for that sort of thing?
Not necessarily. We would, when we started the NEPA process, through scoping, both internal with our resource specialists and external via public comment, we would go through the process of determining what the potentially affected resources were. That would be determined based on what the proposed action is and what we call reasonably foreseeable future actions would be. And in the event of a disposal, because we have no control over what that parcel then gets used for, and the state would have control over permitting any future water use, and it would have to comply with those state laws, we wouldn't necessarily be looking at water availability, because the assumption in that NEPA document would be that is handled already by state law, and then also potentially any county laws that the builders would have to follow for the building permits. Yeah.
If there is not a bid received that meets the minimum or the fair market value, which would be the minimum bid, then what is the process thereafter if the legislation is to dispose of the property? So at that point, does BLM just retain the property, or do they do an appraisal review to revisit the value and then go back through the bidding process again? So I'm just trying to think this all the way out. So what happens if you don't get a bid?
Typically, the parcel would just remain in public ownership until such a time that it could be sold at a later date. If there was an indication, like a strong indication, that the reason that the parcel didn't sell was because the fair market value was too high, we could revisit the appraisal and then potentially put it up for sale again. But typically, it would just go back into the pool of public lands, and then it could be sold at a later date. For example, we actually have a parcel that was one of the parcels that was down in the Costco area that was put up for sale. It didn't sell, and that's now still available for disposal.
I have one more question. If we decided, and I'm not saying that we are, but if we decided not to allow the sale right now, can BLM sell the property anyway?
No.
If BLM retains a property, who maintains it?
Honest answer? Not really anyone. We'll do our best to manage the land, but those are just small holdings relative to all of the land that we manage. And especially given that those are currently identified for disposal in legislation, and therefore we couldn't invest a lot of money in terms of developing them, doing anything to improve the properties, because we wouldn't necessarily be able to justify that knowing that they were slated for disposal out of public ownership. So we would do our best, but there wouldn't be, what is happening now on the properties would continue to happen.
Okay. All right. All right. Further questions of the panel? Anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, just remind me, because I wasn't here then. I guess none of us were, if you go back far enough. But how much land did we get in the Federal Act, and how much of it was open space, and how much of it was eligible for this kind of private sale?
Stephanie Hicks for the record. I don't have all of the specific information, but I know that more than 8,000 acres of federal lands within Carson City were included in that lands bill. And I did put the map back up for you. I know that it's a little hard to read at that scale, but the areas that were to Carson are kind of in the darker green, the forest green, the darker green. There were some parcels that were provided to the Forest Service and also to the Washoe tribe.
Yeah, I just wanted to remember it. I couldn't recall the figure.
Supervisor Barrett, I don't have the final numbers. What I do, and I can get that for you, but what I do have was from the staff report in August 2008 when we brought that forward. So with the U.S. Forest Service transfers to Carson City for open space, the BLM transfers to Carson City for parks and public purpose, and the BLM transfers to Carson City for the conservation easement. It was about 8,000 acres.
So I guess my question goes back when the original hearings and the original properties were identified. I'm assuming that you're saying Carson City helped participate in selecting the properties for disposal. So why is it in our best interest to have these properties sold versus not sold? I'm looking for the benefit to the city and the residents.
Yes, so all the agencies were involved, and one other agency that we didn't necessarily talk about is also the Washoe tribe. They were involved in this process, and it was a matter of all the agencies coming to the table to say, what do we want, what do we not want, and who's the better manager of these lands. And for example, with our exchanges with the Forest Service, what we did on the west side of town, we exchanged a lot of the interface lands right along the slopes, like behind Greenhouse Garden Center, Voltaire Canyon, some around the Lakeview, Timberline areas. Those were managed by the Forest Service. They came to Carson City, and we gave them the upper watershed lands with the whole idea as the Forest Service have timber staff. They know how to manage forests. We don't. Whereas at the interface, we can respond to issues faster with our sheriff's office and other staff who are here. So the same thinking was in place for the BLM, is they came to us with these individual parcels dotted along the landscape, and they're more interested in larger landscape areas across the state. So they're not interested in 1 acre, 2 acre parcels. Whereas for the city, especially if it's related to commercial development, it's better as a whole in the development of our city.
Okay. Any other questions of the panel? Yep.
If
Stephanie.
I could just add to that for a moment, in addition to what Ann said, I think the very nature of our master plan and how these are zoned identifies the vision that the city has for these parcels, how they are in close proximity to other commercial or even future commercial areas, as well as the residential one on Edmonds. So I think overall, our master plan parallels and supports what BLM requested as well.
Okay. All right. Public comment on this one? I don't see anybody on this one. Whatever we do on this one may or may not apply to the next one, so, okay. All right. Well, board, we want to take a position on this? I mean, looks like there's no opposition to having a BLM sell these and develop them. So you want to do a motion? Go.
I move to direct staff to forward to BLM the recommendation for disposal of 4 parcels, one located on South Edmonds Drive, assessor's parcel number 010-192-04, and 3 located off Flint Drive, APN 008-011-94, 010-691-05, and a portion of 008-01117, in accordance with the provisions of the Omnibus Public Land Management Act of 2009 as presented by staff.
There's a motion and second on the motion. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. My electronics is working this afternoon. All right. All right. Thank you. Let's take up 27 Bravo. Pinion Hills issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, for the record, Stephanie Hicks. I would just like to add, as we work through our presentation, one additional component, or actually attendees that we have available, due to the questions that we had that were in regards to water quality and water quantity. We do have representatives from Division of Water Resources and USGS here as well. They will follow our presentation to provide some information that we've asked them about, and then I'll be available for questions as well.
Okay. Again, Ann Bollinger, Open Space Administrator, for the record. So again, on this slide, the timeline is the same. Because this agenda item has more public discussion, some of the items I'll just reiterate for the board is it was a public and transparent process. And even in 2006, when we started this whole process, the lots in this Pinion Hills neighborhood were identified for disposal. And up into, and again, here's the map of the Pinion Hills neighborhood. The long blue triangular property with the hash marks just above that is the Ambrose Carson River natural area, and that is from the result of the bill protected with a conservation easement. That's 230 acres in the immediate vicinity.
So again, this is just a zoomed in vicinity map to identify the parcels and where they're located. There are 14 parcels in this area. We did conduct an open house on August 29th, and for that process, and really this was a lesson learned from when we brought the one parcel forward to the board in 2016. We realized that there needed to be an opportunity to reach out to the property owners and have some conversation about this potential disposal. And so we noticed 103 property owners in the area, and we had a terrific turnout of 63 attendees at the meeting that night. Our role clearly at that time, and as that continues today, is to provide you the feedback from the neighborhood and answer any questions about the processes and allowable uses, so that you have all the information that you need to make the decisions and provide direction. The residents did express concerns regarding water quality and quantity. There were also some questions that came up in regards to drainage issues, recreational use of those properties, and the effects on natural resources in the neighborhood. The zoning for this area is single family, 1 acre, and the majority of the parcels, in fact, all of the parcels are over 2 acres. Some of them are even closer to 2.5 acres. So one of the things that we did discuss and we included in the staff report is, due to the current zoning, there is the potential for these parcels to be split, which could change that 14 parcels to 28. However, we do recognize that there are some constraints due to drainages on the parcels. They would have to meet different densities, or actually setbacks for existing well and septic in the neighborhood. And so we would, there's a chance that it really wouldn't result or couldn't result in 28, but it is zoned that way. The allowable uses, again, in single-family residential would be a residence, a park use is allowed, and then also accessory uses such as farm structures, other agricultural uses, a guest building. So there is the potential that these parcels, or some of them that are not as developable, could be purchased by existing adjacent property owners and used for their own uses. While there is flood hazard mapping along the river, that doesn't extend up onto any of these parcels, so they are all located out of the mapped flood zone. And should these parcels be developed, they would need to accommodate the natural drainage. We do recognize that there are some drainages out there. We would require that those that we obtain easements on those drainages for the existing facilities. And There is no sewer and water available, so they would have to meet the state requirements as well as the city for well and septic. Now, city requirements, when those are reviewed, are really just to meet the setback requirements, but we will go into a little bit more detail about what the state requires. Paved access would also be required at the time of the development, if not already present. You know, on the map, there are paper roads, but they would have to be able to provide either driveways or roads to the new residences. And as we discussed, some of those parcels may be dividable, but that really would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. We did provide a contour map. There are some steep slopes, and with that, that would also trigger some hillside development standards. The new residents would have to meet the Wildland Urban Interface Code, and you know, we do want to caveat that the city makes no guarantee that the parcels would meet all of these state and local requirements for development. Just like any other property, the purchaser would have to perform their due diligence to see if those parcels would be developable. At the open house, we did ask residents to provide their comments in writing to us. I did summarize them briefly, but we really wanted you to, you know, hear from them what their concerns were. And we received 18 written comments. 17 were in opposition. In light of that, we have researched some of the questions that were brought to our attention, such as the first right of refusal, and just, you know, to visit that again. That option is not allowed per the current legislation, but there is the ability to do the open competitive bid process, so we were glad that we were able to get that answer. We did have a discussion with BLM about whether these parcels could be deed restricted so that we could guarantee there'd only be 14 and not potentially 28, but unfortunately there would not be a mechanism in which BLM could do that. And then, of course, we've done some research regarding the water quality and quantity, which will have some experts on that provide you some information.
Stephanie, so BLM doesn't have the ability to deed restrict the parcels from further subdivision, but does the city have the ability to not deed restrict it, but yeah, change the zoning to restrict it so that it's 2 acre?
We did have some conversations with Lee Plemmel, and actually I apologize, I should have invited or introduced him through the initial discussion because he has been part of this and instrumental to it even back when it started through the OPLMA. But we did have some conversations, and the thought was that there is the potential that staff could be directed to rezone those parcels so that they are required to have the 2 acre minimum size.
Stephanie, are all the adjoining properties next to those 14 2-acre parcels? Is everybody else out there 2 acres?
No, actually, there are some parcels that are already 1 acres out there, 1 acre in size. And I'll let Victoria briefly go through the BLM process again.
So the process for this would be substantially the same, and ideally, Stephanie touched on this earlier, for the purpose of our process, combining as many parcels into one document, one process, one survey as possible, it saves money, it saves time, it would be a lot more efficient. So there is some advantage to grouping as many as you guys are looking to move forward with into one process. But really, there would still be the same NEPA process on these parcels, same National Historic Preservation Act process, and numerous opportunities for public comment throughout the NEPA process. Same process applies for the Office Evaluation Service doing the appraisals. One thing I will note with these parcels is that we did look into the first right of refusal, as was mentioned previously, and part of the issue there is that because each parcel is adjoining multiple private properties, through our process, we have to designate one party that has first right of refusal, and there's no way to determine who that would be. And really the legislation having dictated an open and competitive process really doesn't allow for that. So, but yeah, it would be the same. It would be open competitive. There would be an opportunity. It would be sealed bids, but then there could be an auction. And the preference we've heard is that there would be an auction so that there was an opportunity for a open bidding process. And again, that would start with the highest bid received as part of the sealed bids.
And with that, we'd like to invite Division of Water Resources and USGS to come up and provide you some information that they've been researching for us.
How are you doing, David? How are you? Good.
Mr. Mayor, members of the board, I'm Mark Savazlian. I'm the Water Rights Section Chief for the Division of Water Resources.
My name's Dave Berger. I'm the director of the Nevada Water Science Center for the USGS, and I'm stationed here in Carson City.
And we're ready to answer any questions. I didn't know if you had anything for us directly, or if you, I guess that was my understanding is that Stephanie brought us here to sort of provide any answers to any questions you might have.
So do you want to sell these pieces of property?
I don't have anything to sell, sir. Sorry.
I could make some observations that I have from looking at this stuff. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah.
So first off, there really is not a whole lot of hydrologic data in this area. I've searched our databases. I think Mark's looked at his. There isn't a whole lot of aquifer data, water quality data, or water level data, continuous water level data. Obviously, it's pretty intuitive, but the depth to water gets deeper as you move away from the river because of the slope. And so people that are further from the river are going to have to drill deeper, at least to the stage of the river to get to the water table, maybe a little bit higher, because the water table typically has a shallower gradient than the land surface. The aquifer properties out there, if you're above the bedrock, is pretty much very fine textures, and that's because the Pinion Hills are made of volcanic rocks. Volcanic rocks erode into fine grain, and so the permeability of the aquifer is probably pretty low, not like you would find in a river channel. It's pretty low. And I don't know if there's any aquifer tests. I've never seen any, so I don't know if there's any measurements of the transmissivity of that aquifer out there. My guess is it's probably pretty low. The other thing to note is the recharge out there that comes from the Pinion Hills is probably very low as well, because the precipitation in that part of the world is low as well, and so recharge from precipitation in that area would be pretty small. I did look at a couple discharge measurements, one at Lloyd's Bridge and again at, I've forgotten what you, still called Lloyd's Bridge? Okay. And at the Deer Run Road Bridge, measured at the same time on the same day. And what typically it looks like to me is during the fall, when the flows are low, during base flow condition, the river tends to be losing in this reach, just a little bit. And in the spring and during the agricultural period, it tends to be gaining from all the return flow that's coming from the west side of the river. And in a real simple way to look at this, there's generally three sources of water out there. There's local recharge that comes from precipitation in the nearby mountains. There's bank losses or infiltration losses from the river, and then there's a deep circulation groundwater system that has a geothermal gradient that upwells in that property. That's why most of the wells out there are elevated temperatures. So there's kind of three different systems out there. Anytime you throw geothermal waters into a hydrologic area, it gets very complex. Things get kind of hard to understand. So those are the observations that I had just on a little bit that I've looked at it.
Brad's got a question too, maybe for DWR. Just give a thumbnail of what's required in order to bring domestic water to some of these parcels, and then speak to water quality if you can.
I won't speak to water quality. That's not really our purview. That's under the umbrella of Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. But as far as our requirements to be able to drill a domestic well, they fall under basically four sections of the three sections of the NRS and Nevada Administrative Code. NRS 534-180 and NRS 534.350 and NAC 534.315 are the three areas that give us direction under the law. And basically where we're at with that is, to summarize, if a parcel was created before July 1st, 1993 and holds a residential zoning designation, the ability to construct a single-family residence, and if there is not water service available from a municipality, we consider it okay to drill a domestic well, and the amount of that domestic well cannot exceed 2 acre-feet per year.
David, this is for you. And then, the Pinion Hill sits on a geothermal ban, correct?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. Oh, sorry. That goes off by itself, huh? Wow, pretty tricky. Typically, geothermal water has got high TDS, and so the water quality in geothermal water is typically pretty poor. But I don't know exactly what the constituents are in that water. Nevada, because Nevada is being stretched tectonically, the magma at depth is fairly shallow, and so anytime you got deep circulation waters that go down and come back up, they get elevated in temperature. Now, without a lot of data, I don't know how big of the geothermal area is on that side of the river. I don't know what that is. It would have to take a little bit of work to determine that.
All right. Well, we appreciate you being here.
Sure.
To help us weed through some of the questions that might come up. Brad, go ahead.
So the comments that we received from the property owners in this area are mainly concerning water quantity and water quality, meaning if there's currently approximately 100 private parcels out there, I assume not all of them are on wells, but we're talking about potentially adding another 14 domestic wells. So we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% in additional wells being put into that aquifer. What impact is that going to have on both the water quality and the water quantity in that area? The water quality is already poor enough that it has to generally be treated not only for the constituents but also for the heat. It's pretty caustic. So what is your opinion of the impacts of putting another 14 wells in this area? I think that's really what this whole issue really comes down to.
So the aquifer is fairly tight, and so when you pump on it, in order to get a decent yield, you're going to have really steep hydraulic gradients. And so the cones of depression on these wells are going to be fairly steep, but there could be a lot of these cones of depressions. At some point, they're all going to connect. The yield in that area, I mean, obviously anytime you pump a well, you're stressing the aquifer system. What the yield of that aquifer is, you don't know. There are ways to get at that through numeric modeling. You could do what-if scenarios. If you pump here, where will that water come from and how much of that water will be drawn from other areas? I mean, you could actually do that through some modeling. But there's never been any studies out there, so I don't really know what the yield of that aquifer is, or if the aquifer is just the basin fill, the unconsolidated material, or if it's part of the bedrock that's beneath that material.
And after doing some research on our well log database, I would kind of echo what Mr. Berger says, and that is very difficult right now. We just don't really have a lot of data that supports anything one way or the other. I mean, we have well logs, we have water level data, but as far as mapping those things out spatially and determining relative to where they lie in physical altitude and their proximity to the river and what the effects of time are going to be on those, we just really don't have the data to say one thing one way or the other.
Let me follow up on that, though. If you do have well logs and some well data, there are two major effects to that data. One is development, the other is drought or change in atmospheric conditions over the years. Having looked at the well data, have you seen any trending? In other words, the water levels, if they're fluctuating, has that matched up with drought periods, or have you seen it trending, the levels trending down over time with development?
When I looked at the well logs, and I want to emphasize to everybody that this is a very cursory look, and it does not indicate anything that is really substantiated scientifically. But as I looked at the well logs, it looked like there were about 25 wells that had been either deepened or re-drilled in that area. And of those, about 13 of the well logs looked like they corresponded to deepenings or re-drills in the late 80s to early 90s. And this last period of drought that we had that went from about 2011 to 2016-ish. So on the surface, it looks like there might be a correlation there, but there's a lot of other things that go on to basically causing the need to deepen or reconstruct a well, and some of that might be water quality issues which play havoc on the casing, which causes wells to collapse, silting issues. So there's a lot of things there, and honestly, without a extensive investigation and scientific modeling that Mr. Berger had suggested, it's going to be very, very difficult to determine with any scientific backing what's going on out there until those studies are completed.
Something that landowners can be proactive about is measuring their own water level. When a driller drills a well and they first encounter water, they call that the static water level. But in material like that or in any aquifer, it could take weeks or months for that static water level to equilibrate from the drilling itself. So it either can come up or go down back to where it should be. So looking at drillers' logs water levels is a pretty sketchy way to look at the aquifer itself. We do have a well in Ambrosia Park that we put in ourselves as an observation well, and that's the only well in the area that's got any continuous water level data. And it does show it declining next to the river, but it's definitely a function of the river stage. This year when the river was high, the water level popped right back up, so it was definitely connected to the river. But a landowner could make water level measurements 3-4 times a year and look at the trend of the water levels and see what it's doing over time, and that's the only way you can get a sense of how the aquifer behaves relative to the climate, or nearby pumping for that matter.
Okay. Any other questions of this panel? Anybody? Hang around, will you both? Very, very good. Just hang around. Okay. Public comment. Landowners?
Mayor, before we start public comment, could I make a request?
Sure.
I have two schools of thought on this. One is that development seems to be difficult out in this region. On the other hand, looking at the comments from the homeowners, there seems to be significant interest from homeowners in possibly acquiring some of these parcels. So when you come up, in order for us to make those parcels available for you to purchase, then we would need to recommend that they go for disposal. So as you come up and speak, I would like to know your thoughts on that. How many of you are interested in acquiring adjacent parcels, which maybe could influence the way we go on this?
And when you come up, is your interest to have the city dictate that they be zoned 2 acres? Does that appeal to you as well? So those are some of the things I need to hear too.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
And adding to that, is your interest because you feel boxed, or is your interest in actually buying them for purpose? Thank you.
Okay. Now, come on up. Okay.
Thinking about it now.
We can have up to 3 at a time.
Yeah.
I think this is a panel, so we'll take them. Bring in the law. Good afternoon.
For the record, Jennifer Mai from My Law. I represent Kirby Nish, who's a homeowner out in the Pinion Hills area.
Hello, Jennifer. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. I'm going to address quickly the water quality issue on behalf of Mr. Nish, and then I believe he probably wants to address several other issues, and probably also will address the questions that you had posed regarding zoning and purchasing property, since I don't know the answers to those questions off the top of my head. Obviously in this area, and I don't know what you'll hear after us, but based on the comments that were received at the open house and the emails and letters that were sent in when written comments were requested, it appears that there is a substantial issue regarding water quantity and water quality in the Pinion Hills area. There does not seem to be, at least based on the information available now, both from USGS Today and the Division of Water Resources, any substantial information that would imply that it's not an issue. So,
Jennifer, let me ask you just,
absolutely,
because it's going to question anyway, but if they don't have the information, how do you make that statement?
So I think I'm making it based on the cumulative data that the homeowners have acquired over years, decades really, of living there. These are individuals who have been residing there, from what I can tell, back into the early 90s, who have been forced to redrill wells to deeper depths, or who are forced to treat their water and have encountered situations where their plumbing has corroded over time and has had to be replaced. So I think it's anecdotal. It's certainly not scientific evidence, but it's not as if it doesn't exist. There are a number of homeowners, it sounds like at least 63 who attended the open house, who are reporting, at least a majority of them, that they're encountering substantial water quantity and water quality issues. With nothing in opposition of that, it would seem to me to be an issue that would need to be addressed. And
how do you address water quality now? I mean, if it's bad now, what's that say about the existing situation? I mean, it's hard to say, well, the water's bad out there, so don't allow any more development, but let me drink my bad water. So help me understand that.
So I can certainly appreciate that question. I think that in part it's looking at a responsibility to the people who would purchase now. So you're looking at selling 14 lots, which, depending on where you land on zoning, could turn into 28 potential new residents who would then have to either treat their water so that it was potable or be exposed to this poor water quality. There's existing homeowners, we can't deny that, who are treating this water and dealing with the issue now. I don't think that that's something, and I'm not a scientist by any means, but it doesn't sound like that's something that would be changed.
You're a lawyer, that's good enough.
I appreciate that, thank you. So I don't know that selling these lots would change that for those homeowners that are out there, but it would affect an additional up to 28 homeowners if they were subdivided and those additional lots were zoned at 1 acre that would then be utilizing water that had a poor quality. So simply from a responsibility standpoint for the board, you're talking about selling to 28 new individuals who will then have this same issue. That's, I believe, the water quality issue. The water quantity is different. It does seem that, and even based on what we just heard from USGS and the Division of Water Resources, that wells will impact the existing aquifer. And so putting in an additional 14 to 28 wells will presumably stress the aquifer that exists now. And by doing that, you will affect the quantity of water that is available for the residents that live in the Pinion Hills area now. Possible with scientific studies that maybe that's not the case. It sounds like there's some concerns that maybe it's drought related, but regardless of that, the anecdotal evidence that we have at this point is that there is truly a water quantity issue in the Pinion Hills area, and I think that it would be irresponsible and an abuse of discretion for the board to ignore that issue and just move forward with such a limited scientific data available at this point as to what the impact would be with the additional up to 28 wells being placed in the aquifer.
And do you want to answer the question that Supervisor Abad mentioned about zoning it to 2 acres and keeping it at 14 as opposed to 28?
I'll leave that to Kirby to answer what his opinion is on the zoning issue.
I forgot that. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yes, sir.
First of all, with respect to the overall character of the...
Your name for the record. Push the button and say your name.
My name for the record is Kirby Nish, N-I-S-H. And I've been a homeowner in Pinion Hills for over 40 years. And I think it's important consideration to note that homeowners purchased their residences with expectation of enjoying the continued rural character of the neighborhood. And heretofore, BLM has been a good steward in that it has embraced the notion of slow growth over time, balanced growth, meaning recreational, conservatory use, in contrast with the Federal Lands Act and Omnibus Lands Bill, whose exclusive thrust is that of development. So I see an overarching problem with respect to the exclusive focus on sell with the short-sighted expectation of gain to the city through concomitant property taxes, new property taxes. I look as a homeowner at problems that have been brought to the attention of the board, specifically the inadequate water quality, and I am testimonial to that. My well runs dry. I have a pump saver that shuts the well off when it's dry. I have to wait hours for the water to recover. And this is after my having re-drilled a couple of times to make the well as deep as I can. I'm at currently approximately 295 feet, 75 or 95 feet. I know a homeowner, I think it's Maryland, that has drilled 375 or 390 feet. Another property owner tells me that his house was vacant due to quote-unquote no water. And moreover, well drillers have adumbrated the essential point that there are problems with the water, specifically questionable potability. In following the Nevada appeal articles over the past several years, I see challenges to the city for the quality of Carson City wells in Carson City proper, the downtown. And clearly, the water in our residential area pains in comparison to that much better water in the downtown. So I question what future water challenges the city would face with EPA through NEPA over the market lesser quality. I know my water comes from the ground, a brownish color, and one of the chemicals that has been flagged as arsenic, etc., albeit in trace quantities. But my research over the internet has disclosed a pattern of increasing amount of minerals, a function of proximity to the Carson River, and also a function of proximity to mining operations. And as of note, several years ago, and for probably about a decade west of Sedge, which is the entrance to Brunswick Canyon, there was a mining operation. What they were doing with respect to the their specifics of their mining is questionable, but there was that mining presence. I'm looking at from the city's perspective, the notion of impact fees. No disrespect, but typically a municipality that is looking at domestic wells and septic is trending away toward municipal water and city sewer. And as example, Lyon County mandates that residents that have city utilities running by their parcel upon sale or development transition from the old septic well to the city utilities, and this seems a step backwards rather than city wells and city sewer infrastructure would be maintaining the old infrastructure for those parcels. And in terms of typically impact fees, when there's a problem with respect to development, costs, liability, commonly a polity will pass those costs along to a developer, a called for service, police, fire as example. To the developer. In this case, we have no developer to hold accountable for the quality of his well, for his sewer system. So these costs would be exclusively borne by the city. So the liability would be retained by the city. And I look at the cost of putting in this new infrastructure, i.e. more than one well for the Pinion Hills area, along with city sewer, and I'm looking at, what, tens of millions of dollars at the outset. And moreover, if there are questions with respect to potability of the water, perhaps liability issues, and I think of Flint, Michigan, and I know that's an egregious example and not on the scale that we are in Pinion Hills, but certainly we have a water quality problem, and I submit that polities are being held more accountable for same. And finally, we have the slope of the properties. Instead of being a flat, per se buildable parcel, most all parcels in question are sloped each year post rains. I see the city crews, the bulldozers, etc., doing the excavating, trying to keep the water in check. And though we have a sewer assessment on paper, constructively there are no extant sewers in Pinion Hills. So you're looking at tens of millions of dollars infrastructure and more exponentially that a functional liability, and also an ancillary problem, liability problem, is are the power lines running immediately behind the parcels in Pinion Hills. That is a major link between Reno that sources Douglas County, and there have been residents who have succumbed to cancer, and I myself am a cancer survivor, so there is that issue as well.
Do you want to answer the questions on zoning? Would you rather have it zoned?
And with respect to zoning, I'm looking at consistency. 2 acres meshed with 1 acre makes little sense. It's probably going to, if developed, it'll probably end up being 1 acre parcels, i.e. a double drain with respect to the the demand for water, and I look at the first right of refusal, the opportunity perhaps to buy a parcel, not as a positive thing where I'm buying land as one normally would, but buying to limit the development, to maintain the privacy surrounding my house. And I submit that for a homeowner to buy enough parcels to attempt to retain the privacy they now enjoy is untenable. So it's an overarching transmogrification from the rural character of our neighborhood to an urban, figuratively overnight. Hence, I'm markedly opposed.
Are there other non-BLM properties out there that are developable for our staff? Stephanie, do you know?
There are some parcels out there currently that do not have residences on them that are owned by private property owners.
Okay.
So my question maybe is another one that is just in general, but when you purchased your property there, how did you know that you could have good water with a well? What report or what study or what basis did you use to determine to purchase the property?
When I purchased the property, I had expectation of palpably good water. And to my disillusionment, I found the converse. A lot of minerals to the point where I don't drink it. I make other arrangements. And I submit that it is a significant issue and that perhaps it will become a figurative thorn in the side for the city. The quality of water in concert with the inadequacy of the present aquifer to sustain the large number of parcels being considered, i.e. 14, more realistically 28.
And I would supplement that by saying that while someone like Mr. Nish, who purchased decades ago, may have been unaware, at this point it probably would become an issue of whether or not BLM or the city was required to disclose at the point of the auction that there is the potential for the property you're purchasing to have either water quality or water quantity issues, and what that would do to the value that you may recover from selling these parcels.
That was my thought process. I'm not sure if BLM would sell properties buyer beware. I don't know how that process works.
We complete an environmental site assessment that looks at hazardous materials, but as far as any sort of disclosure or potential limitations on development, the expectation is that the buyer does due diligence and looks into those things independently.
Although some of those items should be covered under the appraisal to determine fair market value, so there would be value adjustments based on those types of issues if they're documentable.
Yes, that's actually a great point. If there are known documented issues that may constrain uses of the parcels or may affect value of the parcels, that's all information we provide to Office Evaluation Services, and they factor that in when determining the fair market value.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Koklich. I am a Pinion Hills resident. I'm not a water quality expert, so I won't speak to that. I'll tell you it's nasty. We have a multi-stage filtering system so that we can use it. You know, we moved out there. We bought the property over a decade ago. However, we weren't aware at the time of any, I know that supposedly this was a very public, open, transparent discussion, but you know, we weren't invited to any of those, so we weren't aware of it when we bought it. We bought it and the property next to us so that we would have BLM on both sides. Really, our family was just looking at getting back to a rural type lifestyle that we had when we were, growing up. So that's why we did it. And so, we're concerned, obviously, if those are sold and developed, especially if they are subdivided into 1 acre parcels. So our opinion is if it is sold, that they would be kept as 2 acre parcels, and that the property owners, from our research, BLM does allow for right of first refusal in cases. We're not aware. In fact, today is the first we've heard that this particular case it wouldn't be allowed. But we would be interested in, if they were to be sold, to purchase adjoining property so that we can maintain that and restrict development in our neighborhood.
John.
First of all, you say you have filters. Do you drink that water, or do you go outside?
We do drink it. It goes through, there's a particulate filter, and then we have an iron breaker, which still doesn't keep the sinks from turning orange. Then we go through a water softener, and then we go through an RO system, and at that point it's drinkable.
Secondarily, from what I'm hearing from the two of you, is my question regarding whether you felt boxed in and would buy it. You both seem to feel if this goes forward, you're boxed in, you'll buy it for that reason, right?
Yeah, I mean,
if you do.
Sure. We'd rather not spend that money, but if necessary, that's what we'll do to maintain that. I know in the meeting originally that we had not too long ago, they were talking about it being closed bids, which we don't agree with. We think that this should be open, but also just reading through BLM websites, it looks like in many cases they do give the adjoining property owner right of first refusal. In this case, where there might be multiple adjoining property owners, I think that we could at least discuss that with those property owners. If only one was interested in buying it, then maybe there'd be an opportunity for that.
As I understand it, though, it's not allowed by the law. This particular.
That was the opinion we got.
I don't share that opinion.
I would supplement on the boxed-in issue as well, that while selling the properties now and having people here say that they would buy them doesn't really solve the problem down the road. It might put the problem off a couple decades, but as people pass away and their estates move to additional owners or down to children, it's not as if those properties couldn't then be sold to someone else and developed. So you may resolve the problem now by boxing in the owners, the current owners, into buying these properties, but down the road the assumption would have to be that those would end up in additional private ownership and that they would be able to be developed.
Can I ask a question? If we didn't approve having the properties sold, the issue of drainage out there is an issue, and there's no one to maintain it. Nobody does now. So it's only going to get worse. So I don't know how you feel about that, how your client feels about that, how you feel about that, because if we go into a wetter weather pattern, it's going to be a continual problem, and who's responsible, how's it going to get taken care of? Those are issues that we're wrestling with too.
Well, and I think in part my response, and Mr. Nish may have some additional response to that, would be that selling the properties doesn't by default solve that drainage issue. It just puts additional homeowners in an area where they have drainage problems, noted drainage problems. There may or may not be options to address drainage with the homeowners, and that would be probably a separate topic between the board and the homeowners in Pinion Hills in general regarding who's responsible for drainage issues or maintaining the properties out there. Obviously, not approving it and letting it go forward, as far as we would know, would leave that problem in place. I think that in reality, approving it and letting it go forward leaves the problem in place and just exposes additional homeowners to it.
Also not a drainage expert, but seems like if you were to add homes, drainage would be a big consideration. It's got to move to around the home, and so it's gonna go somewhere. So.
Well, in some respects, and Stephanie, you can address this as well. Anybody buying now would have to. That would be part of any development agreement. So, just my comment. Not saying I'd go that direction, but it would be addressed in some respects.
Yes, Stephanie Hicks, for the record, I would just like to confirm that as part of any building permit that would come in, considerations for drainage would have to be made and reviewed. It would allow the city to place some formal easements on them, as well as give us some enforceability, because now there's a responsible homeowner that we could contact with issues. So we do feel that it could improve the drainage issue.
Jennifer, or Victoria, was the Omnibus Public Lands Act designed to give the city property to sell or property to keep as open space?
I wasn't around at the time that we were working on the legislation. I think Ann probably can speak better to some of the intent that was there at the time, but the way the legislation was written, our interpretation of that now would be both. It was designed to transfer land to Carson City for the purpose of open space, and designed to provide some parcels that would be available for disposal for growth and economic development for the city, and also to alleviate some management issues with those isolated parcels that are really challenging for BLM to manage currently.
Yeah, Brad.
Just a clarification on that language. The city doesn't actually get the proceeds from any of these sales. So the only benefit to the city potentially or theoretically is that economic development is good for the city. So I just wanted to put that out there. I saw in some of the comments that there's, did you have?
It goes to a fund.
It goes to a fund.
It goes to a 95.
What 5% does, right?
That's it.
For maintenance. It doesn't go to the city though.
But it goes to the benefit that we can get grants.
If I can, I'll go ahead and answer that question. Yes, that is correct. Any proceeds of the sale does not come to the city. First, they do go to BLM to offset their cost of processing, and then the remaining funds, 5%, shall be paid directly to the state for use in the general education program, and the remainder shall be deposited in a special account in the Treasury of the United States to be known as the Carson City Special Account, and be available to the Secretary to expend for other acquisitions for sensitive lands.
Right. The reason I wanted that on the record is because in a lot of the comments from the homeowners there seems to be an assumption that the city would be approving this so that they would get the proceeds, and that's not the case. We don't get anything out of this, nor are we doing a trade of open space for open space, again, because we don't control. These are BLM parcels, not city parcels.
Okay. All right. Anything further? Jennifer? Mr. Nish?
Nothing for us.
Brian?
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, guys. All right. All right. Other public comment? Sure, come on, come on.
I'm Merlin Payne. I live in the Pinion Hills area, and I wholeheartedly support the previous comments, including Mr. Nish's and his attorneys. I've been a resident of Pinion Hills for 24 years and bought the property. We liked the area, and the house was being built at the time. We decided to go ahead with it, and we found that we couldn't occupy it unless there was a water treatment system. There was no certificate of occupancy allowed on that property unless it had a specialized water treatment system. So that was put in. We went ahead to purchase and occupy that property. So I've been out there for 23 years. I am an earth scientist, and I am very concerned about the aquifer in particular. Also, It seems to be going, my letter is the one that says my flow has been cut in half and my well has dropped by 12 feet in the period that I have owned that property. Homeowners on either side of me, also they have well cutoffs because it goes down, it doesn't recharge, and they don't want to build it, burn out their pumps. That's really common. Another neighbor, and Mr. Nish referred to this, is that there's no water on the property. He abandoned it. It's just sitting there, not rented anything. Now, this is not down by the river in that floodplain where the only USGS monitoring well apparently is. This is up in the hillside. And so my property is about 4,800 feet, and my well is 235 feet, and there are people above me, and their well goes almost 400 feet deep to get to water. Now, this is all geothermal, and yes, I've had one pump burn out. I've replaced well casings. My faucets in the house corrode and have to be replaced. I think I'm on my 4th garbage disposal, my 3rd washing machine. You know, it's kind of a nuisance thing, and it looks ugly. There are a lot of issues here. Erosion is rather obvious, and you saw the photographs, for example, just from one street. And the intersection at Deer Run and Persia, for example, is sometimes blocked and has to be cleared before cars can continue down a major arterial, which is Deer Run Road.
Blocked with what? I'm sorry.
From the slope, and it's debris, okay, rocks, and mud that comes down. Now, there is a city right-of-way there, and there's supposed to be a drainage easement down that. And it's true, there is, and it comes down from the top of the hill and cascades down, including over the driveways, including mine, continues going down, erodes it very badly. There's a lot of very bad gullying, and then it collects at the intersection at Persia and Deer Run Road. And you've got a photograph, at least one, in your packet showing what happens.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In your capacity as earth scientist? Suppose there was no development out there right now. None.
Yeah.
Should we be allowing development to occur there?
No.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. And there are 2 reasons. My personal highest concern is the aquifer. And it is getting drier here. And it is getting warmer. And the aquifer is being tapped continually by more and more homes. And that's not a good thing. The other thing that's happening out there is the septic systems are going in there, and of course they're supposed to drain down into the aquifer, going through the filtering levels of particulates and all the other good things that clean the water. But there is a nitrogen problem, and it's included very nicely in the staff report that there's an issue here, and any systems that go in have to be equipped with a denitrification system to make that reasonable to go back down into the aquifer. The more homes we have out there, the more it's going to be a problem. And even in my immediate neighborhood, which is 1 acre to 1.15 acres, they have to bring in surveyors to figure out where is the well, like my well, where is my septic system, and then they have slopes. Where can they put their well? Oh dear. And then where can they put their septic system? And it's this constant puzzle that goes back and forth, and it's very complex. And people who are moving out there more recently because they like the rural environment, they're spending a lot of effort and money trying to figure this out. And there was one house that I didn't think could be built, but actually they figured out, yeah, if you move it 5 feet more in that direction, then it'd be legal to put the well there. It's pretty complicated. So we go back to the basic premise that nobody really knows what's going on with the aquifer over there. And yet there's a proposal to punch a bunch more holes in and draw out water for just about any use. People do have because the wells are not monitored, they can do anything they want. They can put in a reservoir pool just because it looks pretty, just a nice pond. Nobody has to be out there on drip irrigation. You know, they can put in landscaping like crazy and just tap on the aquifer. There's no restriction out there whatsoever. So that's kind of an open season. So that's
There's a restriction on the amount that you can pump annually under a domestic well.
That is a recent. You're right. That is a recent development. For the older homeowners, I don't think that applies. Okay, so I think the overall impact. We've got the erosion. We've got the water. We've got the sewer system. You know, essentially. If the water quality gets worse, which it would, if the aquifer continues to dry out, that means that more and more people are going to have more and more problems trying to get water for their existing homes. And I think there was one other point, and I just forgot it, but in the staff report, the strategic goal is quality of life. And that's kind of an issue here. There are existing residents, and we moved out there whether we knew there was going to be a water problem or not. We moved out there, we're still out there. We really like it in a lot of ways. In other ways, it's a constant headache. And every once in a while, I get up to here saying, you know, but then I look around and said, no, this is worth it. I don't mind shoveling debris off of my driveway as it comes down the slope in the right-of-way. I don't really care if the bulldozers keep me from going out onto Deer Run for half a day. I don't really care about that stuff. So if we're talking about quality of life, the existing plus the responsibility to any future buyers and the open disclosure is a huge issue. And the city is responsible for making that decision. One other overview that I'd like just to throw out here, and again, the staff report, and by the way, many appreciations for all of the background research that you've all done and for the board to hearing this in such detail. We're talking about 28 acres. 28 acres, that's all, out of 8,000 that was transferred. Okay, so the city is not going to get the sales money. Their maintenance and their problems are going to go way up if these parcels are developed. What does the city get out of it? Well, if you estimate, let's just pretend, $3,000 a year tax assessment on each parcel, that comes out to be $42,000 a year revenue to the city. Now, the city runs on not thousands of dollars, but hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in revenue and expenditures. This is pennies. This is nothing. Even if all 28 parcels were developed, and let's pretend $3,000 per parcel per year, it's $84,000 a year. That's nothing. To go through all of this effort and the BLM issues and the city issues and the ongoing maintenance and the ongoing complaints and concerns from the residents, I can't see that it's worth it. Now, obviously I'm opposed. I hope that you do not pass this on as a recommendation. And furthermore, I think that I'm certainly not interested in buying a parcel out there. I'm certainly not. Number one, they're not going to be cheap. This is not a throwaway kind of deal. The parcels that sold most recently, two in front of me, were about $250,000 each.
What was the disclosure on those parcels?
I do not know.
That was going to be my question.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that my husband and I made offers on those according to the assessed value, and we were quickly outbid, and it was turned over. But the most recent is between $200,000 and $300,000. But that's, yeah, I mean, your point is exactly on. I don't know what the disclosure was. My guess is there wasn't much. Or the other thing in that area is that a lot of buyers buy in and say, this is really pretty, this is we want horses, stuff like that. And they have no idea what they're getting into. And after people move in, they say, well, my God, here's all this equipment. Like I have like 10% of my garage dedicated toward purification equipment so that the water that comes into the house is usable for silly things like washing dishes and taking showers. But then it goes in, I mean, that's because coming out of the well, it's 120 degrees, it's 56 grain, it's very, very, very hard, and it's full of nitrates, TDS, all the rest of it. It's not okay. Anyway, so it comes finally into the house, and I can use it for the miscellaneous uses. And then it goes through a reverse osmosis system. And that comes out, and that is drinkable supposedly. But you start fooling around with water, and then something isn't quite right with it. And my personal approach is I still run it through like a pure water or a Brita water thing, and then I can drink it. Otherwise, it gives me some problems. So I guess I just sort of wanted to carry on that. Thank you for letting me.
It's very valuable. I guess what your point is, is that, you know, it's one of these things where Mr. Nish has been there for 40 years, watched development occur. You've been there for 20 years, watched development occur. And now what we're saying is that's too much because we're overstressed that area right now. Is that what you're saying?
You know, it's not that I don't like neighbors, because neighbors are okay. In fact, I have quite a few really good ones. And the area is pretty, just the way it is. It's really good. But I am really worried about the resources. And if I mean, there are a couple of options for homeowners who live there now. And I've been going through all of these because I'm on the line here. How long do I want to try to keep this property? How much money am I dedicating toward trying to re-drill a well or make it deeper? How much more do I want to handle in this particular area before I say I've had it? And even if I sell, I wouldn't sell at a loss, but even if I sell below what the current market value is. So anyway, it's not a question of sour grapes and not in my backyard kind of thing. I'm really worried about the resources and the people who are already there, whether they bought 3 years ago or whether they bought 42 years ago, or certainly the people who might get into it now. And
I mean, I guess, and really, I don't mean to, I'm very interested in what you have to say.
Maybe I didn't hear your question.
No, so suppose you had, and just suppose.
Sure.
Adequate disclosure of all the issues we're hearing about today, and we've heard about at the open meeting. And with the requirement that those disclosures have to be made to any potential buyer or developer of that property, any of these 14, 28, what do you want to call it? Does that satisfy your concern or not? Or is it the
no,
fact
because
that
it doesn't look forward far enough, because if you look at the plat map, which these are not as detailed as you had up there before. There, okay. So, for instance, on Persia Road, there'd be 4 extra houses added as is. And those have access to Persia Road. Okay, I'm not even going to talk about the drainage on that. But you notice some of those parcels are essentially landlocked. And so you're going to have developer or city development of easements and paved roads into those internal parcels, plus all the problems that go with it, the erosion, the humph, the whatever, and all the rest of it. This is really, this is a tangle. This is a Pandora's box. And I'm not talking about the short term, because if all of us are stupid enough to be there or buy into it, you know, shame on us. But the city is a nice city. And I don't think for $42,000 a year, it's worth the effort and the fuss, because the return for the city is essentially zero. Anyway, thank you.
Well, you're very articulate, and I was just going to say, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I love the Omnibus Public Lands Act because it gave us a lot of open space that we have here.
Oh, yeah,
that we love. And but I'm not too happy about having to make this decision to take that off the back of the BLM. So anyway.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon.
Hello. My name is Charlene Barron.
Charlene?
Charlene.
Charlene, thank you.
Most people here know me as Charlie. But I'm going to change my direction a little bit from where I was. But I have lived there for 20 years. We were given full disclosure through our real estate agent as to the water quality. We could not close without a reverse osmosis system on the drinking water. It didn't have to be whole house. That was eaten up by the water within 3 years, and we decided not to replace it and just to buy water at the grocery store. I bring my 3-gallon bottle over. So the water quality, I think, it's quantity. Quality we live with, and it's part of the pioneer spirit, and for me, that you have to deal with this. Ours is 133 degrees in our well, and it eats up the faucets and the grout and everything. But it's just part of living up there, and I like it because I'm not living in Reno, in the city. So anyway, one of the points that Ann or Victoria brought up was that in selling these properties, it was opening up or creating a space for BLM not to have so many disposable properties. Although 3, 4, 5, at least 6, probably 7 of those properties are abutting BLM lands, open lands. So in disposing of them, all you've done is gone up the hill further. And it's not going to solve any drainage problems because the drainage problem is coming from higher up on the hill. I don't see any reason to dispose of the properties that just abut BLM. I mean, they've been there that way for years, and I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. You just, again, we're putting more stress on the aquifer. We're putting more septic systems on essentially 1-acre lots. I really look at the septic system as being as big, probably, of a problem as the water quantity problem. That's just, I live on an acre, and I do wonder if that's a big enough. I moved from 20 acres to the 1 acre, and I really do wonder whether 1 acre is a big enough partition between homes and septic systems to really not have an effect on the water as it percolates through the soil.
Charlie, would you want it to be zoned? If we were to zone it, would you want it zoned 2 acres for that reason?
No.
No. Okay.
No. If you're telling me I should go worst case scenario, I suppose. If you're telling me you had to approve this, it would be better if it wasn't 28 homes. I don't see the reason for it. I don't understand why it's necessary. You've got a couple of parcels that are between 2 homes. I mean, that kind of makes more sense than 28, but I don't know. Like you say, like we've been saying, nobody's maintaining these properties. Nobody has maintained those properties in the 28 years, or the 20 years that I've been there, and it hasn't caused, except for erosion on our heavy rain days. It's part of living up in the hills. Thank you.
Victoria, can I ask you a question? On Charlie's comment about some of these parcels abutting BLM property right now, why are we doing that? Is this because they've got an APN attached to them?
Why are those parcels included?
Yeah.
Because they were identified in the legislation.
By APN?
No, they're actually identified by blocks. And so those parcels, those squares that show up on this map, that has to do with how they were parceled by the city. On our maps, our master title plats, they're actually large blocks. So all of each contiguous set of parcels is one parcel on our maps.
So all 14 are one parcel on your map?
Not all 14, but actually if you look at this one, it's kind of hard to see, but each of those red lines outlines what is one parcel on our maps.
Yeah, I see.
But you gave them separate APN numbers then? Or is that how that worked?
The city, okay. Just curious.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, yes,
For
ma'am.
the record, my name is Jacqueline Sandage. I've been out there for 23 years.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. To reemphasize what you asked one of my neighbors earlier, is it already stressed and we're going to overstress it more? That is exactly my concern. I reiterate what Charlie said. It's not so much the quality. We knew when we bought it that we could not drink the water without running it through a reverse osmosis. We knew that it was hot. We knew there are issues. We're on our third pump in our well since we've been there. I mean, we have a holding tank in the garage. We have a reverse osmosis. We have a water softener. We have all the things that everybody else has. That's not the issue. The issue is as we drill more wells, what happens to the quantity. And then, of course, I talked to a gentleman who was in the septic business for 30 years, and he said probably the biggest concern, and it's exactly what she said, 1 acre. My septic system actually is very close to my neighbor's septic system, which I don't know how that got approved when they did the building, but kind of wonder how all that percolates and then drops down, you know, as we add more houses out there, how much more septic can that groundwater absorb? And then, of course, what does that run off to the Carson River? You know, when we did a VA refinance, they made us test the well. And I asked the guy, what are you testing for? He said, main concern is nitrates. So we need to know if there's any fecal matter going into your well. So those are the concerns that I have. So I actually, and I'm adamantly opposed to the sale, and I'm with Charlie. Worst case scenario, if you told me that you were going to approve this, then I would say the 14, but I would ask that you don't approve it at all. And exactly, I mean, it's been sitting there now since 2006 when they approved this. They didn't feel the need to sell it in 2009. Why do we need to sell it now? So, thank you for your time.
Thank you. You know, it's an interesting thing from an urban development standpoint. When people have their own wells and their own septic system, they want to have it. And, you know, we have a rule here that, you know, I think it's within 1,200 feet of a water line, you got to hook up to city water and city sewer, city water anyway. That's a cost to doing that, and I frequently hear complaints, why do I have to do that? Just give that to you. It's one of the things that we deal with here. So. Well,
and actually, to address the drainage issue, a couple years ago, I wanted to put a road on the side of my property. I have one of the gullies that went through my property. It cost me $10,000 to have a culvert system put in, and I think the city made me pull 5 permits. And that was my expense, just to accommodate the drainage. So, I mean, and again, the drainage is the drainage. I mean, we've been there, you know, and we accommodated it. We did it because it was on our property, and they said, you can't avoid, you know, because I said, why do I have to pay for that? And they said, because it's a part of your property that the natural runoff of that drainage system, you're going to have to put in the thing, and it cost me $10,000. So we did it.
Well, let me ask you, and I know we've talked a little bit about it, and I don't mean to belabor the point, but one of the issues that intrigues me about taking it out of BLM hands, because they're not doing anything with it right now, and they're probably not going to ever do anything with it, is solving the drainage problem for the folks who are down closer to the river from that. And I hear the statement that, you know, it's not coming from these parcels, it's coming from even up above that. But at some point in time, if those parcels were sold or developed, there'd have to be a requirement that they deal with the drainage just like you did. And so, you know, there's a certain amount of, and I get the overstress of the aquifer and the nitrate issue with the septic systems, but I'm wondering if, just a wonder, if the development of those parcels on that eastern side wouldn't facilitate, if the drainage were done properly, if that wouldn't help at least that side of it.
I'm not sure about that because you're on a hillside, so your drainage is coming really from multiple, and we actually got flooded 2 years ago, and it was the city didn't clean out the culvert above us, and the water rose above, came down over and washed our rock, and we had probably a couple $1,000s worth of damage just from it pooling in the rain and everything, and that really isn't. It didn't even flow into the culvert that we paid money to have it go through because the city didn't clean it out. But that's another story. But it's a hillside. You're on a hillside, so you're going to have, if you have a heavy rain, it's coming down. No matter what, it's coming.
We're aware of that one pretty carefully. A lot. Yes, Charlie, go ahead.
It's a sandy hillside. So who was talking about the geography of it? And so no matter, unless you went all the way to the top of the hill with homes, I don't think you're going to stop any drainage problem. Even with the new regulations on building, we get these torrential rains and the flash flooding, and flash flooding's going to happen no matter how high up that hill you're going to build, like I say, unless you got to the top and there's a big dam. But it's sandy soil, and it's going to run off.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Go. There's another question. Hang on.
Actually, mine's probably more for Ann and Victoria. So I was just trying to put perspective a little bit here too. Is when the properties were identified in our master plans for development and in the omnibus bill, the only reason that those didn't go to sale at that time was because the market was depressed. Did I catch that correctly? So the decision was we're not going to put them up for sale in 2009 because the BLM didn't feel that it was the best market price. Did I hear that correctly?
I would clarify that it was the city that made that decision, not the BLM.
Why would this, well, I'm trying to understand, because why would the city care about the market price? Like they said, it doesn't have anything to do. We don't get the money, so why would the city have cared what the sale price of the parcel was? So what I'm missing something there.
Hi, Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director. Ann waved me up here, so I'll come up and start to try to answer questions. I was here, maybe one of the, I guess maybe the only one here that was here back then when we sent the letters out. I remember talking to Mr. Nish there. I don't remember if he remembers me, but your question was about
why didn't it go to sale when we accepted the lands?
So the omnibus bill says that the board needs to approve it, and the action, the board action was to delay it because the value wasn't there, because the value is important to get that pool of money to purchase open space. I forget the term, sensitive lands in the area. So
it was
so if the pool's smaller, we don't have as much money.
Fund.
So that was the reason at the time.
So it was a financial decision to not sell. It wasn't based on water quality, quantity, septic tanks. The issue really revolved around the ability for the purchase price.
I think that was, and that's my recollection, and that's what the staff report indicates. I was going to indicate too, a clarification. The parcels existed. The way BLM describes, and going through the bill and their map in general, they describe things in very gross descriptions. The 2-acre parcels existed at the time of the bill and when we were going through this process. So they were identified specifically, and then BLM develops the map for Congress to act. So that was kind of the sequence of that.
And Stephanie Hicks, for the record, I would just add to that I actually researched that with the assessor's office because of a comment that Mark from Division of Water Resources made earlier. He said if the parcels were established before 1993, they actually already had their water rights and would have a right to put a well on those parcels today without having to transfer any rights in. And although we couldn't pinpoint the exact date, it was between 82 and 87 that those parcels were created with APNs.
So that's interesting, though, when you talk about subdividing these parcels. So the way I would interpret that law is that there was an automatic right to put in a well on that APN. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's an automatic right to put in an additional well if you subdivide that parcel.
My understanding of that is correct. If they were to subdivide any of those parcels, they would have to transfer in the 2.02 acre feet required for a new residence for the additional parcel.
So, or 1.01 per, if you split the part, well, I guess it would depend on who bought it and whether they kept the water or, if, okay, I got it. Thank you.
I may be on a fishing expedition here, but can you tell me why we have an APM on property that we didn't own or know we were going to, I mean, not own, but have at the cities? There's a reason for that?
You put identifiers.
No, in researching, did you explain why the parcels exist? I mean, all I know, so these parcels were identified with separate APNs. I don't know the history of that, but I remember on the city maps, as we were going through this process, as the federal representatives asked us during our master plan process, identify what properties you want as a city that you need for public facilities, identify what properties you want for open space, identify what properties you want to sell for development. We were very specific in identifying these particular properties, and they had APN.
I understand that. I just wonder why it occurred in the 80s when you didn't have this on the horizon even yet. Or maybe you did.
I think.
I don't know the answer to that exactly, but I have some information that may inform that, which is that most of those private parcels that were sold, they were actually previously in public ownership. And you can kind of, it's hard to see on this map, but you can kind of see on here, there's kind of that square of these subdivided parcels. Most of the ones that were sold were actually sold out of public ownership through a small Trax Act sale, and I believe it was the early 80s. And so it's possible that all of those parcels were created then for those initial sales.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in from the public? Yes, you want to come for a second shot? Come on.
I'm Merlin Payne again. I have just one quick point. If you notice on the vicinity map, the way it was originally platted by the developer, a lot of the streets that are going up the hillside go down and they run at a 90-degree angle onto Deer Run Road, which means no matter really what's going on, where the right-of-way is or whatever, the drainage is going to run down the hill on the right-of-way, and it currently runs right across the road into the house that is on the other side of the road. And we have a number of situations like that where people, when it looks like some rain's going to come and the mudslides are going to come, they're out there sandbagging so that their whole driveway and front yard area are not covered with the mud that's coming down the hill. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in? If not, we're going to take a break here and then we'll come back and see where we go. So unless there's somebody who wants to weigh in, I don't see any. So let's take a break for about 10 minutes. We'll give us a chance to go use the facilities that aren't on septic, and we'll go from there. get cranked up here again. We're gonna get cranked up. Okay, Stephanie, let me put you on the spot. With the issues of quality going on, let the quantity go for a minute. With the quality going on, what's the benefit to the city of either maintaining the status quo out there or exacerbating the problem or whatever? Why do we want to do this? Why would we want to do it? I mean, if you don't want to answer, don't answer.
Stephanie Hicks for the record. Well, actually, I think some of the things that we do need to consider are the fact that these parcels are not being maintained currently, and we've discussed that. We've talked about drainage, but we've also talked about being checkerboarded amongst a developed area. They are not being adequately maintained for fire hazards or weed control. And so again, that would provide us some opportunity to do those things because there would be a responsible owner that is developing the property. It is, again, something that has been part of our long-term planning process, not just in our own master plan and zoning, but also through BLM's management plan, and identified as parcels that they have concerns and issues with maintaining, which I think is evidenced by the history. And I think for those reasons, it's important to consider.
Okay, sure.
The issue I have, and I've heard this over and over again because I sit on the water board, and vision in my mind is Johnson Lane, sandy soil, same thing, BLM land, abuts, residential area, not maintained, higher up, more development, more problems to be maintained. So in some respects, I hear what you're saying, but I also feel like the issue, this won't address that drainage issue. That drainage is coming from further up. And so it's just going to be more parcels impacted by a situation that exists out there simply because of the nature of the soil. So I'm concerned about this in that I feel it kind of follows under the category of sensitive land. And it also concerns me that we are overstressing the aquifer out there. That's evidenced, and that concerns me. It also concerns me that the last water study was done 26 years ago. And so I'm concerned about that too. I do think this is a quality of life issue, and so I really can't support the sale myself.
Well, my two reasons for potentially supporting this would be to allow adjacent property owners to purchase parcels and to mitigate some of the drainage issues on these parcels. I think I am going to disagree a little bit with Karen that I do think it will help with some of the drainage issues out there. Not all of them, but some of them, because we have a responsible party. On the other side, the potential reasons not to support this, I think that there are enough development hurdles in this area that it's unlikely that you're going to get anybody that's going to want to purchase these at or above market value. The water quality, I think it's a development issue. It's not really a city issue. It's a development issue just like any other development issue that you have if you purchase this property and want to build a home. The water was bad before any of you built out there. It's going to be bad after we're all gone. Water quantity, however, is a different issue. If we put more wells in there, then obviously it's going to impact the aquifer in that area, although we did hear, at least anecdotally, not with any scientific certainty, that the water levels, it's at least superficially, may be tied to the weather, the drought patterns, more so than the number of actual wells in this area. So at this point, I haven't decided which way I'm going to go on this, but I asked that the homeowners let me know in their comments if they would be interested in purchasing or not. I had two people say that they might be interested in buying. One said no. I talked to one other person who said yes. So I've got three people that may potentially be interested in purchasing some of these parcels. I don't know that that's enough to sway me. I would really like to have had a lot more people tell me, you know, yeah, I want to buy some land out there and keep it open. So I haven't made a decision yet, but I'd really like to hear what everybody else has to say.
No, you know.
Are we?
No, you know, I'll just tell you, you know, I thought, you know, I'm sensitive to the issue of the parcels being, they're there. And Stephanie, you know, when I asked you that question, I mean, you answered that perfectly from the standpoint of, you know, perhaps what a responsible point of view is. But on the other hand, I look at this and I say, you know, there are issues out there. And if I'm going to exacerbate them, why am I doing that? Am I getting I mean, you know, I don't look at this as being a city moneymaker. Whoever said you get $43,000 a year from real property tax, whatever. You know, I don't look at it from that standpoint. I was looking at it from the standpoint of, are we going to be able to, if it goes into private hands, are we going to be able to help some of the drainage issues out there? And I'm not certain we get there. So, you know, from my own standpoint, I'm wondering, you know, and I appreciate, you know, BLM, you know, you guys got a federal law that you're complying with, but, you know, when I look at it and I say, you know, what do I accomplish by doing this? And that's where I'm struggling. I'll just tell you that. So, and it's my 2 cents.
I think that all of the points made by all sides are valid, and that makes the discussion even that much more difficult, right? Because everybody's issues are accurate or important in the overall discussion. And so to determine which side of the ledger wins, you really have to put the most pros and the cons to each decision. And so as we weigh this, which side has the stronger? And so if we really believe that the water quantity, not quality, because I think that is that's all handled by mitigating factors and rules and things that you have to do to make the quality. So I'm going to take that one off the ledger. I'm just going to, so now I want to decide whether the quantity of water in the area is appropriate or not. And so if I weighed it from a city perspective, what risk do we have if we allow them and then we find out that the quantity is insufficient and now we have well failures? Does that force the city to have to put in a project to salvage the 100 parcels? And I guess I'm trying to think to the long-term potential burden is what if there's insufficient quantity, and I'm actually getting kind of concerned about that with or without these parcels after listening to all of you. And so do we exasperate or speed up any issues of having to potentially put in a $10 million water sewer lines? And I guess that's right. And then they'd all have to pay and get an assessment, and I happen to have grown up in a particular piece of property here, and that very thing happened. The city has gone to properties and made them hook on to the sewer system and assessed all those property owners substantial amount of money to hook in. And so I guess for that reason, as I look at the ledger, I'm concerned about the quantity of water, and I don't think the benefits outweigh that potential quantity issue.
Well, Lori makes some good points. Karen's made, you've all made good points, but for some strange reason, this goes back to my dinner table when I was a child. And I have seen throughout my life, I only heard discussions at that point, but I have seen throughout my life of covering government and being in government that septic tanks and wells on the fringe of the urban area come back to bite you. So I'm going to go with the people here who are saying, I don't think I can make this recommendation. In addition, we live in high desert, which means it can bite you even bigger time than you would think otherwise. So while I'm pro-development, I just don't think I can go with this one. Septic tanks are my big problem, but the well problem is also. I mean, I covered for the Omaha World Herald water issues, and I have seen it. It always comes home, the old 2-acre plots, 1-acre plots out of the fringe. They come back. I've seen SIDs, or what they call SIDs, and the city had to gobble up the bonds. It just goes on forever.
Okay. You want to make a motion, Brad?
You're not going to like it.
The sad thing is, I think we all actually agree more than. It's just, again, which one outweighs? Because on surface, I would have said sell them.
Yeah, well, I agree.
And bring them back into the city. Yeah. They're part of the master plan. I mean, if you look at the big picture, the answer was easy, right? Bring them in. But when you get to the detail of a direct impact, I'm really more concerned. I'm not so sure we're not bringing them in anyway at a point in time.
Yeah, I'm not.
I mean, I want to. And at that point, when you bring them in, then you can put the parcels up for sale, right? And mitigate everything all at the same time, but.
Well, I guess from a BLM standpoint, suppose we had a landowner that came and said, look, I'd really like to buy that, and it has to go to a public auction or a competitive bid. Can we still do that?
An individual parcel.
By individual parcel?
An individual parcel, yes, you can. We would still need a decision.
I mean, what happens if we just say, leave it status quo right now? What's the downside? Is there a downside to BLM? I mean, I know you got the property, you're not doing anything with it right now. But.
Those are challenging parcels to manage. Anytime we have isolated small parcels within urban development, they're a challenge because we get complaints from adjacent landowners about uses that are occurring, and the reality is we don't have a lot of resources to manage those kinds of issues. We're not set up to manage urban types of issues. Mm-hmm. And so it's, it'll continue the management challenge, but ultimately it doesn't really change how we're moving forward right now.
Suppose we rezone that, instead of 2 acres or 1 acre, everything that's on there, open space.
As far as?
Carson City's zoning, suppose we said it's open space. Took it off the.
Public conservation?
Public conservation.
Yeah. Then we have to maintain it.
We have to maintain it, but, we're, in a sense, we're in that box anyway. I mean, because people are going to look at us. I mean, I know they're already looking at us anyway, but suppose you did that.
Nick is choking over there.
Can I answer that one?
Huh?
And then Nick can certainly follow me. No. And we had that opportunity. So back in 2006, when we looked at these parcels and what is the best use, and we did look at open space, parks, and residential development, it was decided at that point in time that residential development was the most appropriate in this neighborhood.
Yeah, that's not to argue with it, but that's 10 years ago. Answer the question. Can you zone it public purpose right now? Could you rezone it?
The question is, can we?
Can we?
I'll look at Lee. Can we? And then I think there's a question, do we want to?
Yeah. That's not on the agenda.
Yeah, I think if the property is going to be under continued public ownership, including the BLM, the public zoning district, or some other similar one that we have for other BLM properties, could be appropriate for zoning for the properties. As long it would have to be, if ever in the future, then they were to be developed, then it would need to be changed then.
Okay, so maybe solving a problem and creating another one.
Right.
Mayor, if I may.
Negative loss.
If I may address a question that you had before that one. You said, what if an individual property owner came in and expressed the interest in purchasing them? Well, last year in 2016, when we brought the Pinion Hills parcel to you, that was the situation. We had a specific individual who was interested in purchasing it. And then since this time, we've had indication of at least 6 parcels people were interested in. So we have had that interest. So it does occur. I mean, it is occurring today.
And I appreciate that, because I know we were here when the last one. So, you know, and for goodness sakes, for all of our staff in the BLM, regardless how we come tonight, you know, I want you to know, you know, your efforts in analyzing this situation have been remarkably good. So don't think that if this comes down one way, that you may have done something wrong, because you didn't. You guys have done a wonderful job in analyzing this property right here. Okay. All right, Brad.
I have a follow-up question on the process. So if you have interested parties that are interested in a specific parcel, does that require us to forward a recommendation to sell to BLM? Or if we forward a recommendation not to sell, can an interested party come forward on a specific parcel and acquire it?
No, because the legislation directs that the city has to approve it. We would have to have a decision from the city recommending it.
So can we make a recommendation to make them available for purchase but not put them up, all 14, in a public auction? Can we say if somebody is interested, then yes, we would? I'm trying to understand the process.
Yeah, I mean, we would at some point have to know, you know, if you made the decision that you wanted to make them available, but only as people came forward, you would have to tell us each time somebody came forward. You would have to make the decision that we have interest and yes, this parcel can now be sold. So there would have to be some subsequent decision that said, yes, this parcel is ready to be disposed of.
We can do a parcel at a time. We don't have to do all 14.
It creates, yeah, absolutely.
It's more expensive for you.
It's more expensive. Right. It's a lot slower. It's a lot more time consuming, but it is doable. It's not, there's nothing in the legislation that says they all have to be sold at once. It could be one at a time. It could be certain, you know, whatever configurations you identified.
Next question is then, if that occurs and someone comes and says we're interested, does it have to go through a public auction process?
Yes, based on
That's what
this.
I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Stephanie's right, we've had this drill before, but sometimes it takes a couple times to go through these things. I guess Stephanie gets back to the question of, I mean, developer or no developer, it's what does the city as a municipality gain by selling the property? I mean, are we making an advancement in terms of drainage? Are we making an advancement in terms of quality of life for these folks out there, or not? How are we doing on that? I mean, you know, I know that's what you pay us to do, but
and honestly, you know, our goal was to bring the facts forward to you. And I do think it can be argued either way. You know, there are benefits in my mind from just a planning perspective in regards to the drainage. You know, it might not solve everything, but I think it gets us closer to solving problems than we are if we don't do anything. For the fire mitigation, I think that's a very real, pertinent concern that we would have some opportunities to mitigate those. We're certainly on that the wild land urban interface, and we don't have a way to manage those resources that are out there right now. You know, I know there's been a lot of discussion and concern in regards to water quantity as well as the septic systems, but by putting these or making them available for sale, there's a real potential that some of these could be developed with uses that don't require water or additional septic if they were to be purchased by, you know, adjacent property owners and used as an extension of their property for you know, animal keeping or other things. So it certainly is a hard decision, and I hope we presented you with as much information as we could. You know, it goes both ways. Right now, those parcels have a right to a well. I think Division of Water Resources would tell you if someone came in with a well permit and requested to drill a well on those today, they would be allowed to do so. The state has certain requirements that they have to meet for septic density and distances from well and septic, and as long as they could meet those, if those were in private ownership, they could be developed today.
hang on a minute. Let us deal with this one. Hard enough. Okay. Hard enough. John, did you have a...
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that if we did it the way we were just talking regarding, parcel by parcel, and they went to auction, then those people who are adjacent landowners would have a shot at still getting it. So I just wanted to get that on the record, which is fairly obvious, I believe. And thank you, too, for the work that you've done. It's been good. I have one question for Ann, because she called Lee up and had him take the dagger from the mayor on, but he answered the question straight up. But you were about to say something about should we? So would you complete that thought?
Should we rezone to open space? So the question was, can we?
Yeah. The question was, can we? And you said something about should we? And you left it hanging.
That's when I redirected the question to Lee as the community development director. Can we? Should we? And I think too, the question was also answered is we're redirecting one problem to another. So
basically, you're saying we shouldn't.
And I will say this, in my opinion.
That's fine.
No.
What I was asking for. Thank you.
All right. Somebody want to make a motion to approve the sale? Somebody want to make a motion to recommend that we not proceed at this time with the sale? All right. See where it goes. Time to, as they say in the old language, time to peep or get off the branch.
I'll peep.
Yeah, exactly.
I move
Peep or
to...
get off the branch. You know what it means, Maureen? Time to speak up or move.
Yes, sir. Just don't say tweet.
Okay.
I move to not direct staff to forward the BLM the recommendation for disposal of 14 parcels located in the Pinion Hills neighborhood. APN 010, should I keep going with this, or? Okay.
Second.
Okay.
All right, discussion.
Yeah, so I think this is pretty evident where this is going, so my final comment's going to be that I think consistent with what we did up on Clear Creek, where we did not approve additional density in that case because we couldn't service those parcels. We have a situation here where I think I could live with development of these parcels if they were already in private ownership, but they're not. They're in public ownership. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and go with the rest of you here.
All right, on a motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried. All right. Any abstentions? Any disclosures?
How do we have one of those?
All right, all right. Anything else to come before the board? We're last time for public comment. Closing public comment. Anybody want to weigh in? Yes, no? All right.
Remind people to clean out their storm drains.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, storm drains. I know we're being televised and for everybody here. Once again, if you have drainage issues out in your gutters or storm drains or something like that, make sure you let the city know. If you have Carson City Connect on your iPhone or your app or your Android phone, let the city know. We'll be out there. Supervisor Bunkowski just told me that there was somebody who, a couple hours ago, he said somebody requested, an issue or notified an issue, and it was solved within 20 minutes. So, we're doing our best to do these things. We're probably going to have to live with this river of water for this entire winter system. So if you got problems, let us know, and we'll do our very best to take care of it, okay? So, Nick, is that all right? All right. All right. Unless there's anything else to come before the board, we're adjourned. By the way, thank you, staff.
Yeah.